Yo, with the kind of shit that I'm about to talk about on this episode, I feel like this might be classified as one of the wildest ones, if not one of the wilder ones. But, yes. We are gathered here today to discuss matters of guy-like importance that, relates to everyone for the most part. But all in all, this episode is going to be involving quite a lot of forces, because we shall be handling some spiritual forces, we shall be handling some financial ones, and there's gonna be some sexual forces in there. And normally, if you're into nerds and puns being intended, this would be the time when they'd start talking about how they wish that the force be with you, except that this is one of those times, and I'll tell you, you wish you didn't have any of these forces affecting you, mainly because of what I intend on discussing on this episode. But before I can get into all of that, I need to start things off by talking about a very interesting high school incident. Now, there was a teacher in the US of A who was slapped with rape charges after having sex with a 16-year-old student using other students as lookouts. Now, of course, this isn't the first time I've discussed a story like this. It's just the most interesting twist to this entire thing is the boy's dad was also busted for allowing this relationship to happen, which means his wrongdoing was him not being a cockblock.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Because you think about it, and I know there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to be talking about how, this is disgusting, how can a teacher do this to a student, blah, blah, sexual assault, blah, blah, statutory rape. But here's the thing, like, when you look at cases like this of a teacher and a student having some sort of an affair, and the student is a minor, normally it's considered to be universally bad if the student is a girl and the teacher is a man, or maybe even a woman. But if it's a switch on the genders whereby the teacher is a woman and the kid is a guy, people are gonna look at it a little bit differently as opposed to the whole sense of disgust in the previous situation. Because here's the thing, if you ever look at the stories, especially when it comes to the titling and the wording, you'll find that whenever the minor is a girl, then usually they'll state that the teacher raped the student or molested the student. But whenever it's a guy, like whenever it's a boy that was the underage one in this entire scenario, then you will find that the teacher had sex with. Like, that's usually one of the things that you'll see with a lot of these stories. Go and check the titles, go and look at the wording of everything. It won't be a case of molested or defiled or raped. Nah, usually it's had sex with or had an illicit affair. Like, it'll sound a lot nicer with guys than it does with the women. But anyways, let me just read the full story for you so that you can get a little bit of context on this entire thing. So it says, and I quote, "A Missouri teacher has been charged with statutory rape for allegedly having sex with a 16-year-old student," see my point, "while other students served as lookouts, with the boy's father also facing a felony charge for condoning the disturbing relationship." Lackey High School math teacher Haley Clifton Carmack, 26 years old, was arrested in Garden Ridge, Texas on Friday after she was suspected of fleeing the state of Missouri to avoid arrest warrants, according to law enforcement. Allegations of the sex crimes committed by Clifton Carmack first arose on December the 7th, 2023. A fellow student reported the alleged illicit relationship to the school's resource officer, who immediately contacted the Pulaski County Sheriff's Department, as according to the court documents. The witness then met with law enforcement officials, to whom he showed photographs of his classmate with scratches on his back. The witness alleges that the scratches were from Haley after the confidential victim had sex with her in the driveway of the witness's home. The witness also claimed the math teacher had been in trouble with school administrators in the past for being too close to students. Clifton, a recently divorced mother of two, would often wear tight or low-cut shirts to show off her headlights, quote-unquote, and tight leggings that showed off her camel toe, according to court documents. Following her arrest in Texas on Friday, she was charged with first-degree endangering the welfare of a child, second-degree statutory rape, sexual contact with a student, and fourth-degree child molestation. Her bond was set at $250,000, according to court records. End quote. Okay, first of all, I think we should probably acknowledge that the person who leaked this information to the authorities was probably butthurt. Now, I'm not saying this for certain. At first, I was thinking probably it's a girl who wanted this kid and she got turned down and she noticed that the teacher's been getting a little too close. But considering that it said he showed, it's definitely a guy. And I wouldn't be surprised if this guy wanted to get pussy from this teacher and she refused. Because to be honest, if you are one of the lookouts, you're definitely gonna get some sort of benefit. So probably a hand job or some shit. But when this kid decides to go and ask and then she's like, nah, I'm not giving you, I feel like that's the only reason why you'd interrupt someone's opportunity to get some pussy as a guy, considering that we know very well how hard it is for most guys to get pussy. Although, then again, considering that I don't know much about being a cockblock, I might as well just leave it at that and start the podcast in a much better way with a lot less young people in it, with a bit of pizzazz by saying, welcome to the Breaktime Podcast, the podcast where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is an adult who does not mind scratching someone's back, provided that they're not underage or in the middle of an orgasm. He's a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has started in one of the wildest ways I have ever started an episode. Now, granted, of course, like I said earlier on, it's not the first case of seeing this shit happen, but it's even wilder that the father found out about it and was like, I'm not gonna stop my son from getting some pussy. And then the other kids were like, you know what? I'm not gonna stop him from getting some pussy. And then the one guy just happened to mess everything up. But all in all, we have an episode that we need to do, and I have a bunch of tweets that I need to talk about because this is a Friday episode, and I think I've spent so much time discussing the earlier bit that we barely have time to start getting into the drill and everything. So as usual, if you see the tweets, if you want us to discuss certain tweets, then you can send them to the socials and the description below, and I will get to them and I will handle them accordingly. Now, I do have a couple of tweets that I need to get into, but before I can get into that, I want us to talk about something that just so happened to bother me on this specific day when I'm recording this episode. Now, as I was busy trying to prep for the episode, I had two things that I was busy debating to discuss on, like plus size people in planes and BBLs and shit. And for some reason, it's like both my feeds on IG and Twitter were actually having stories of witchcraft, which is wild. Normally people say, oh, if you see blah blah blah, you manifest that shit. I had no thought of seeing this shit, but it appeared on my IG, it appeared on my Twitter. Maybe it's the algorithms working together, but all in all, I saw feeds regarding witchcraft. Now, when I was on IG, because I thought I could get away from it while I was on Twitter, the very first thing that I saw when I opened IG was someone who had put up a tweet which said, and I quote, "Please do a background check of a person before you date him or her. I'm battling witchcraft because of a man I've been with who's a wizard. It's rife." End quote. And when I saw this, what I was thinking to myself the entire time was, how the fuck do you expect us to do a background check? It's not like this person went to Hogwarts or some shit and we can see it on their LinkedIn, or right next to skills on someone's CV, you're gonna see some shit like Master of the Dark Arts or some shit, or one of those certification badges. Plus, it's not like these guys practice it in broad daylight for everyone to look at and be like, okay, I can see that he likes doing his magic at this and this time. No. So how exactly are you going to do a background check? Now, of course, some people try to explain this entire thing by talking about how in the African context, doing background checks meant you going to talk to people that are associated with this person and ask them how they are and how the family is, blah, blah, blah. And the entire time I was like, okay, yes, whoever it is that's saying this probably has a very, very genuine point, and it is something that our parents used to do. It's just that nowadays that's particularly hard to do, especially if you live in the city and you're dating someone from a particularly different culture. Because here's the thing. If you meet someone in Nairobi who's born and bred in Nairobi, whatever community they ascribe to, they've pretty much been brought up in Nairobi. Alright? And most people in Nairobi, if they're not going to gossip about some shit that they don't entirely know about, it's not like these guys will be watching and waiting to see whatever witchcraft this other person's going to do. And it's not like the people who engage in witchcraft are doing it in broad daylight for everyone else to see. So you go and you ask people that know her in Nairobi, and you'll probably find that they'll be like, oh, okay, she's a pretty nice babe, or she's strange, or she does this and that. They will never really tie anything to her possibly doing witchcraft if that's what you're trying to check for. If you were trying to check for that shit, you'd probably have to send someone to go and check her cultural roots in the village and see if that family is particularly known for witchcraft. Which is why I said, if you guys are from two particularly different cultures, that shit is particularly hard. And at the end of the day, considering that there's not that many people that are that well tied to their roots back in the village or in some other person's village, how many people do you think are really going to be capable of doing that? So I figured for the most part, this isn't bad advice, it's just not easily executable advice. But when you look at the Twitter cases that I found, because it was like a series of posts that I saw on Twitter where someone supposedly found a couple of TikTok videos where people were busy talking about blood magic for the wildest reason I have ever seen, which is to secure the person that you wanted to be with. And most of this shit was targeting women because a lot of it involved period blood. And I was actually looking at some of these videos and there was some of the wildest shit I'd seen. Alright, so stories about if you want the man to stick to you and not want to be with anyone else but you, or to stay with you, then what you do is you write their name and you put it on your pad when you're having your periods, and the blood should mix with the paper that has his name and shit, blah blah blah. And this entire time someone else is giving another video of, if you want this man to stick with you, then when you guys are in bed together, you remove your underwear and you put it right above his head and you start whispering the desires of what you'd want him to do with you and how you'd want him to stay with you as the underwear is on top of his head. And the entire time I'm just thinking, why the fuck would you go so far to secure someone that probably wasn't even the best fit for you? Because you think about it, if this guy wanted to be with you, you wouldn't have to go through all of this shit. Like, you don't have to do so much just to get a guy who wants to be with you to be with you. And also, securing a nigga isn't even all that hard. You don't need to go into the dark arts and channel spiritual forces, if it's possible to do that shit, just to get a guy. Because the thing is, I can't say if this shit is bullshit or not. I do not have the particular requisite tools to figure that shit out. And frankly, I don't really think it's worth finding out. Because to be very honest, nailing down a dude, especially one that wants you, isn't that hard. I can literally give it to you in like a 4-step process. Alright, step 1, respect this man. Step 2, listen to this man. Step 3, feed this man. And step 4, fuck him. You have covered 80% of whatever this guy would want to stay with you. If the guy still doesn't want to be with you, then there's a pretty good chance that he wasn't really meant for you. Alright, but someone is going into the dark arts, into witchcraft, just to keep a dude? Like, I'm not even going to call this weird, this is just flat out crazy. And I feel like if you're a babe and you're doing this shit, you are crazy. Period. And I don't even feel like discussing this too much. So I'm just gonna leave it at that and move it on to the tweets. So on to our very first tweet of this episode. And it's by a woman who said, and I quote, "All I'm saying is, if you meet an older man, 35 and above that is, who's single, you'll understand why they're single." End quote. Okay, now I don't know if this one's just a me thing, but I feel like this isn't even a 35 and above thing. This is any adult in general, or at least more so, this is any male adult in general. If you talk to them for a couple of minutes, you'll probably figure out why it is that they're single without them really having to tell you. Because it can be a values issue, it can be a situation of, them not feeling like they're financially confident or just confident, or you might find that the guy is just a hoe, or the guy just has a shit attitude or a shit personality. Like, you can figure that out pretty quickly after having a conversation with just about any guy. So for you to say that, if you meet an older man who's 35 and above and you interact with them and they're single, then you'll understand why. Like, I feel like this is just most guys in general. Because, okay, there's a lot of guys who are 35 and above who are single. And can I say that they're single for particularly bad reasons? No, I don't think all of them are hoes. I don't think all of them just have problems committing. I think some of them just either were dealt a bad hand at life, or they made some mistakes, or maybe they decided to save it for last. Because there's guys that decided to follow the bag and chase the bag, and probably they were giving everything back to the family, or they were trying to support some people that was beyond themselves and they had to grind their way through, and they're like 36, 37, and they're making their own money, and they've made sure everyone around them, or at least the people closest to them, are comfortable. That one, completely understandable. There's also other guys that say weren't that well off, and they were dealt a bad hand earlier in life. They didn't start in the best form of employment or some shit, or they had to work their way up, or they went through some shit and life happened and they had to start again from the bottom and bring themselves up. There's also other guys who have had financial issues, and as a result they did manage to date because they had to stack up the dough, and now they've started making dough and they're above the age of 35. And there's also some guys that made some mistakes early in their 20s or some shit, and probably they got into drugs, or they had an addiction problem, or they were having some sort of sickness. Maybe it was mental or physical, and they just managed to get back into the market when they're a lot older. So at the end of the day, there's gonna be a lot of reasons. Hell, there's even going to be some that are a lot simpler than you might think, such as they just don't want to commit. And there's definitely going to be those reasons all around, and I don't even think that it's something that's very, very specific to 35 and above men. I think this is just true for most guys. You go and you sit with a guy and you talk to him long enough, you'll probably figure out why it is that they're single. With women, it could be a little bit harder because a lot of times, some of the sweetest seeming women can just be some of the most devious or manipulative, and it's more a case of you find out not necessarily just from talking to her, but from checking out the friends, from the close and intimate interactions, or maybe listening to what the exes said. It'll probably vary, but for most guys, you have, say, a 15-minute, hell, maybe even an hour's conversation with them, and you'll probably figure out why it is that they're single. But all in all, I could be wrong about that one, but I'm going to leave it at that and move it on to the very next tweet. So it says, and I quote, "Am I wrong for going on a couple's trip to the Zanzibar alone because my man can't afford it? I make more money than him, but I don't want to miss out on this amazing trip because of his finances. We are not married and I'm still young." End quote. Okay, the long and short of this is, yes, you're wrong. First of all, why the fuck are you going for a couple's trip alone? Are you going to third wheel some person's couple, or are you trying to be the spare tire so that when one couple decides to fight, assuming that this was a group couple trip or some shit, when one couple fights, you'll be the consolation pussy to one of the guys when you're telling him, what, she's just not feeling right, and you definitely deserve better or some shit like that. I don't know. I don't entirely get this whole, am I wrong for going on a couple's trip alone? It just seems dumb, to say the least. But even with the whole couples thing pushed aside, if it was a trip that you guys wanted to go together and it's supposed to be a couple's trip, then I feel like if you're going to do it as a couple, which is a unit, then you're supposed to move together. If the guy doesn't have enough, are you willing to chip in, probably on loan if it feels like so much of a bother for you to give him money, and then he pays you back when he's got his own? That's an option that you could have selected. The other alternative is you could have just canceled the trip and chosen to take it at a different time. One of the things that I noticed that was pretty common in the comment section was people who were saying Zanzibar isn't going anywhere, which makes quite a lot of sense. It's not like the whole Zanzibar thing would have gone anywhere, because it's not like we know of any earthquakes that are happening. It's not like the place is supposed to be bombed or some shit. I don't think there's Al-Shabaab nearby. So for the most part, why go for it as if it's something that's expiring and leave your man's because he can't afford it? If anything, that's one of the ways that you alienate your man and you start pushing him away, such that this guy will either break up with you or will start having a thing with someone else. It's shit like this that makes guys feel inadequate, and when a woman comes and offers to bring back that adequacy via pussy or some shit, all of a sudden you find out that this guy has been sleeping with another woman behind your back, and it's purely because you never made him feel like he was powerful or wanted the entire time. But then again, was it wrong for you to use your own money to go on a trip? No, there's nothing wrong with you using your own money. It's just that if it was a couple's trip and you decided to go solo because your mans couldn't afford, then there's a pretty good chance that you probably weren't interested in you going for it as a couple, much as you are just going for the trip. But then again, I might be wrong about this entire thing, so I'll want your thoughts on that. But for now, I'm gonna leave it at that and move it on to our very final tweet of this episode. And it's a tweet from another seemingly bitter woman who said, and I quote, "Why do guys want us to experience hardship with them to prove our love and loyalty so bad? Why are they obsessed with that shit? Do you have a struggle kink? Y'all are mean as hell when y'all are grinding and broke, and nothing will make me put up with it. Not even love. Like, be for real. If I don't have to struggle, I won't. I don't have to prove shit to you. Life is a struggle enough without guys trying to play Olympics with it." End quote. Alright, so I am going to go out on a limb and say that it's not right for a man to want you to struggle with them, because who would want the person that they love to go through struggle, or at least through the suffering? Like, I don't think guys usually want to put their women, the person that they love, through the suffering and struggle that they go through, because, you know, we go through this shit so that we can make your lives easier. But the test of struggling and growing together has been a test that has worked for a lot of men, that has worked for many, many years. And as such, that is something that a lot of us guys believe should work when it comes to determining how good of a partner a woman is going to be. Because what's a bigger test of loyalty than when you stick with a partner when they're down? Like, that's usually just the thought process behind this entire thing. I don't think a majority of us guys want our woman or our women, if you're into that kind of thing, to experience the hardships that we go through, or whatever hardships we're struggling with, so that we can consider them to be great partners. But it is a good indicator that someone is going to be loyal with you and going to be your ride or die if they choose to stick with you when times are hard. Like, that's just the gist of it. But now, the unfortunate side of it is that today's current dating market doesn't exactly work with that as an indicator, because on one end, there's a lot of women that have complained that, you know, the guy can all of a sudden make it and then drop you and go for someone who wasn't struggling with y'all. And in some other cases, you know, like this woman said, they have stated that, you know, the guys, when they're broke and mean and so-called grinding, can be particularly, you know, mean and angry and treat them like a piece of shit. And they don't want to go through that as well. And that makes a lot of sense. It's just that with the current dating market, we have something that I'd like to refer to as the money man paradox. And I'm sort of overcomplicating something that's particularly simple, which is hypergamy, to say the least. And the explanation for it is, when you're a man with no money and you desire a lot of these women, a lot of them are going to turn you down and they will disqualify you. And you'll also disqualify yourself because you will not feel confident, because you're not financially well placed. And you know, you kind of have to stack up that dough, which they definitely want stuff that requires you to stack up that dough. But now, when you grow and you make money and you're doing pretty well, and now you have the money and you're a man, then you have this plethora of women that want you to commit to them in a faithful relationship while you want to be with no one else but them. Which is hard for a lot of guys, because they have literally moved from a point of having no women interested in them to a plethora of women being interested in them, and they want to satisfy this desire for all of these women. So what you find is that some of these men will become unfaithful partners and be in some sort of unfaithful commitment, or they will choose to not commit at all. So they will not be the most ideal partners, at least for the faithfulness and the kind of commitment that a lot of these women want. So you find that the people that would want to commit to these women that are not the money men will not be selected, but the money men that are selected have such a massive plethora of women that have selected them that choosing one to settle down with and be fully committed to becomes hard, because not only are they unable to deal with the thought of dropping all of these women, but they haven't had the training, because they themselves never used to get the women so that they can learn to stick to one woman and be faithful way back then. Now, the only ways to beat this sort of paradox in the dating market are to date a guy just before he becomes successful, or, you know, you get a guy that actually wants to be committed to just one person and they are successful, of which there's not that many of them. And at that point, you probably will have hit the gold mine. But considering that for the most part, most of these guys are above the age of 35 and a good number of them still aren't thinking of committing to one person, then maybe these women that are thinking of witchcraft might actually have some merit in what that. No, there's no bullshit that'll get me to think that that's actually a good idea. But all in all, maybe my analysis of this entire thing is absolute bullshit. Maybe I'm right. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on X, or is it Twitter? It is at BagakaTheD. On Facebook and on IG, it is at the Breaktime Podcast and the Breaktime_podcast respectively. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.